How do you communicate to product designers what you want from them? Draw things on whiteboard, show competitors' app and ask them to do yours like that, but better. Or maybe send them telepathic waves. All this is possible, although we don't recommend relying on telepathy too much. However, there are more effective ways to ensure a designer embodies your vision, and the most common is creating a design brief. Hi, I'm Ilya, the founder of Eleken, a product design agency for SaaS. Today we'll talk about design briefs, how to use them, and if you can avoid them altogether. Spoiler, yes. Let's go. First of all, let's discuss what is design brief and why do you need it. Generally speaking, a brief is a document with a list of questions about specific tasks. In design, this document is a set of requirements that helps designers understand what the client wants and also help to define the direction for design. Usually, a good design brief increases the chances that the result will be fully satisfying and without tons of revision. It reduces the risk of misunderstandings between the client and the design team. A design brief is an input from the client, and it should reflect the vision and expectations from the project. But creating a brief requires the teamwork from the designer and the customer. You don't need to worry about forgetting to mention some vital information in your brief. If the designer you've chosen is a professional, they will never leave you alone without the task. But you're an active participant, so how do you write a design brief? We have put together a list of typical questions that will help you prepare for hiring a designer. When you answer them, you can assume that 90% of the brief is ready. The remaining 10% will come during the discussions with your designer. Ready? Let's start. First, write out what does your company do. Even if it seems clear, it's best not to assume that the designer knows everything about your company. The deeper the designer understands your business, the more opportunities for creativity they have. Write clearly and concisely. What does your organization do? What background does your company have? What are your goals? Let designers deeply understand your big goals by sharing your product vision or mission. Next question is, what tasks should the design solve? Describe the deliverables. This is probably the most important question to ask yourself when ordering a design from an agency. Explain what you're trying to communicate with the help of design and why. Clearly state the project scope, desired outcome, and objective deliverables that you expect. Describe what pain points your product solves for users and how design can help in this regard. Next, what is your target audience, or who is going to be using your product? You may mention your user's age, education, occupation, income, etc. But most importantly is to describe main use cases. Explain to the designer who these people are, what issue they want to solve, and how you expect them to interact with your product. Next, mention who are the competitors and what differentiates your product from them. Knowing your main competitors and the unique value proposition of your product is also very useful. The design should reflect the brand's unique advantages to help you stand out among rivals. The next thing to think about are references. References are the example of the other designs you found. It may refer not only to the visual design and style, but also some design patterns you've seen in other products. For instance, you remember that long form in that insurance company you filled in recently and it was convenient, so you decided that maybe it's a good idea to design it as similar for your onboarding process. Show examples that you think would suit the most, even if it's the design of your main competitors. By doing so, you set the bar for your expectations. It's not a good idea though to simply rip off a competitor's design or ask the designers to make it like Stripe, even if you like the products of their design. What works for them won't necessarily work for you. And finally, show the designer what you do not like. This will give them a general idea of your tastes and preferences and prevent you from getting frustrated with their work. Last but not least, question to answer, what is the timeline and budget? Don't try to wiggle out of this one. Knowing the budget allows the designer to plan their work process according to the resources they have and optimize the time and resources spent. Then give the designer a timeline and set a realistic final deadline. You have to consider the different stages of the design work, such as consultation, concept development, execution, production, and delivery. It's true that sometimes it's simply necessary to complete the work quickly. In such cases, honestly, honestly inform the designer in advance. This way, they'll be able to plan their work better or negotiate if your expectations are not realistic at all. Discuss all the above questions with the designer before you start the work. Although you may think some of them are trivial and the answers obvious, the quality of the design depends on these details. Need some real-life examples of how brief can look like? In the description, you'll find a link to our article where you can see brief examples and templates. For now, let's move to the interesting question. When classic design briefs don't work, clear goals and requirements help in the design process. Designers appreciate clients sharing a brief that can become a North Star in design process. However, you can stumble upon some problems. For example, young startups might not have a product manager on the team, so writing a design brief often falls on the founder's shoulders. For them, writing and submitting effective design requirements can be a very complex task, as founders might not have the right expertise for it. Even though that's absolutely fine, designers might wait for ages to get the design brief. Another common case is that discussion with the design team often inspires the product owner and changes the initial design vision and requirements. Then, clients' ideas about the desired format and concept of the product may change in the process too. In that case, there is a need to update the brief and you may feel your time was wasted on writing it in the first place. Moreover, to write a good design brief, you must collect and structure a large volume of information on the product in a short document. Without prior experience, that can be difficult. This is especially true for the product design. Finally, brief is the most effective when you want to order a design project from an agency. But when building a product from scratch, a short brief is simply not enough to cover all the requirements. As you can see, a design brief can be highly useful, but it also depends. So you might ask, do you really need a design brief to start working with a designer? We've already spoiled the answer. A design brief helps a lot in framing the project scope, objectives, and expectations. Brief is definitely a nice stepping stone, but it's not an absolute necessity to start working with a designer. In fact, many successful collaborations begin without formal brief. It is one of the cases when you're working with experienced designers or agencies. Often, they can get all the info they need from initial consultations and discussions. They can guide you through the process, help to define goals, understand your audience, and pinpoint design requirements. This approach often leads to more organic, evolving understanding of the project. This can be crucial for startups or businesses still fine-tuning their vision. At Eleken, we've used to rely on formal briefs, but now we've shifted to more informal interview. We ask basically the similar question that we've outlined before, but it makes us more flexible and adaptable. We work iteratively, constantly getting feedback from our clients. This allows us to move step by step and make sure our visions are aligned on the go. So this also allows the owner or product managers some space to express their needs and wishes outside of the box. You can learn more about Eleken's approach to SaaS design in this video. So eventually, the decision to use the design brief depends on your specific context, the nature of the project, and the working style for both you and your design partner. In any case, remember that design is always collaborative, and until the tech allows us to translate images from our heads directly into other people's brains, you need to communicate with your designer a lot. That's it for today. Like, subscribe, and share the videos with your colleagues and peers if they happen to complain about their design miscommunications. See you the next time.